Okay, cool. Anthony, I'm going to share my screen and then you can get going. So here we go.
Great. Thanks, Mia. Um, and yeah, I actually,
Oh, shit, no. I'm sorry, I muted you. I muted everyone. Ask to unmute. There you are.
and
Sorry, my fault.
okay. Yeah,
Okay,
no,
now,
no, it's
now
fine.
you can go.
Thanks, Mia. Um, what I was saying is that I can't see anyone on the call, which is probably a blessing, because if I saw how many people on the call, I'd probably get really nervous. But I just wanted to say thanks again, Mia, for having me, and I hope you will enjoy um, today's presentation. So Mia tasked me, she said, most of you are writing novels, so if we could write something about a viewpoint with the novelist in mind. So I came up with this prezzo called A Million Windows, which I'll explain the title to you now. And essentially it's made up of some of the very top level tips or insights that I'd love to share with you, that are sort of gleaned from my workbook called the Viewpoint Workbook. So A Million Windows. Mia, if you can go to the next slide. So I got the title from a quote from Henry James. So he says, "The house of fiction has not one window, but a million. Every consciousness upon the scene, every point of view is a window of itself." And I like this quote because it really captures how viewpoint shapes, opens, or limits the story a reader experiences. So for novelists, it reminds us that each narrative perspective is really a unique window into the fictional world that we're creating. So if we think to Henry James, he was kind of a precursor to the modernist novel, was very much taken with the psychological insights that he could get into his character. So very rich psychology in the story, a lot of stream of consciousness, and a lot of work done on viewpoints. So, like, for example, one of his novels, The Ambassadors, is written purely from a limited third person point of view. And that was really to create this immersion, to show the character how he is transformed through his travels and exposure to European culture as an American. Of course, if you try and read Henry James today, it's impossibly dense, almost impenetrable. Um, yes, but it's that kind of beginning where we started to look at, like, what could Viewpoint do to the story? How could we open a window into different lives and different characters? So we'll go to the next slide. So yes, how do we open the window to the story world? So viewpoint is really a lens for your story. It'll determine what readers see, feel, and know about the story and the characters in the story. So the one thing I really want to impress is you should always choose viewpoint with intent. And that word's very important because you need to know why you're using that viewpoint, why have you chosen that specific viewpoint to tell your story. So for example, if we take an example like Harry Potter, for example, imagine if the story was told from the viewpoint of his aunt, Mrs. Dursley, at the beginning, and she was contending with this crazy child who thought he was a wizard and was visited by strange people and lived under the staircase. I mean, the story might progress to the point where he's like catatonic in an asylum, and we realize that the whole fantasy of Harry Potter is locked inside his head. A very different lens into the story. So yeah, it's very important to know why you're telling this story and why you're telling it from this viewpoint. If you think about it, viewpoint is really like a camera and a filter. So who is our guide into the story? Who are the characters or the voices that are showing the story and opening it up? So you really do have to pick it on purpose because it changes just how close your reader will get to your characters, how close they will get to the action in the story. And then as we go on, we'll also discuss like how much can they trust your narrator and how invested will they be in this story and the characters in the story, because the more they're invested in the story, the more the emotional payoff for the reader will be. So next, I'm just going to read you a short example from a little piece I wrote quite a few years ago. It's called Crash, and it says, "Call me Sid. The Oldsmobile clocks 60 miles an hour. I feel the vibrations of the old powerful V8 engine through my artificial body. The electronics in my nervous system hum. The world of speed is exciting. Danger and the burning rubber smell of scorched adrenaline. I guess it has been this way for our kind for 75 years. My distant cousin Sam, for example, was the first, Sierra Sam, they called him, and he met his end in the air, testing pilot helmets, ejection seats, that kind of thing. They speak of him sometimes at family picnics. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the indifferent camera recording my reactions, my body. That lens captures everything, down to the last gory detail. Where will I end up this time? In a crumpled barricade, a ditch, maybe a somersault in the air? Who knows? So as you can tell, this story is written from the viewpoint of a crash test dummy. So I use it just to illustrate that you can use any viewpoint and you can give any object, person, and we actually touched on this in this morning's class, even a place might even have a viewpoint. There's no limits to it. The one thing you need to ask yourself, if we go to the next slide, is whilst you're writing the story, maybe whilst you're exploring your first draft, or after you've done your first draft, or as you're planning your story, ask yourself, who's the best storyteller for my novel and why? And you should be able to answer that. You might be intrigued by it, you might not fully get your arms around it, but it is a question that you should be asking yourself. It goes back to what I said earlier, is that viewpoint should always be chosen with an intent. So now, if we go to the next page, I just want to cover a little bit of the most common viewpoints that we use. I'm just highlighting 3 very broad strokes viewpoints. There are actually about 12, probably even more than 12 viewpoints that you can use. Like, for example, in third person alone, you get 3 different techniques for viewpoint. But we're all familiar with these 3. The first person, we all understand this. I went to Sadie's party last Saturday, and we use it because it's intimate, it's immediate, it's simple. We don't have to think too much about this viewpoint. The second person, this viewpoint is probably the most unusual viewpoint. It's also the one that's the most difficult to write. It's when you're conflating that role of the narrator and the subject of the story, almost like they're talking to themselves and having a conversation with themselves. So it's a little bit of, and also bringing the reader into this sort of self-reflexive conversation. Like, for example, you don't like surprises. You don't like surprise parties, Anthony, but here you are at a surprise party and you're turning 40, 50, whatever it is. So we use it because it is kind of immersive. It's a very risky viewpoint, and it sort of creates a nice offbeat tone to the story. The third one is the third person, and this is the one that we are most used to when we're reading fiction. So if we read this first line, the Onyx Club was an extravagant neon escape for the young and the beautiful. As you can see, even from the establishing line, there's no specific character in the story yet. The story has been posed to us. It's been moderated by a narrator who we don't understand who that person might be, and they are outside of the frame, outside of the story. We like it because it's familiar. It gives you, as a writer, a lot of flexibility, and it has a nice visual. You can bring a lot of visual storytelling to it as well. So I just wanted to gloss over those 3 things. I'm sure all of you are familiar with them. But what I want to do really impress upon you for the next slide is if you do a little bit of homework and if you start to understand the techniques of viewpoint, it really can be your superpower as a novelist. So don't get too hung up on the technical aspects of it, because really that's just one element of viewpoint. What you should be doing as a writer, and especially as a novelist, is exploring viewpoint. Like, what can it reveal? What can it hide? What can it twist? How can you use it to distort or even sublimate the narrative? As we've seen, the narrator can be visible, it might be easily identifiable, or is ambiguous in the shadows, and we might never know who this narrator is. So Viewpoint is a very powerful device because it controls what the readers know. But not only that, but it also determines what they will feel about the story. So when we create narrow viewpoints, we create intimacy, or we can pull out and create a bigger picture. And of course, the voices in the story also will inform your viewpoint. So what are your narrator's quirks, their bias, their blind spots? All of these can be storytelling tools. Remember, sometimes the narrator is in the heart of the action. Other times they're just observing, and they are observing other characters or other action, and they are slightly outside of the story. Great. So if we go to the next slide, and that's what I want to say about A Million Windows, is it's the whole rainbow. It's not just those three viewpoints that we understand, first, second, and third. These viewpoint doesn't just tick those three boxes. It can go deep inside a character's mind, as those people like Virginia Woolf and Henry James are trying to do. It can be an omniscient narrator, almost like a godlike figure, or it can be something that almost removes viewpoint completely, like this cold, distant camera. And you can really use all of these colors in the rainbow, whether you want to write something super close, if you want to write something a little bit further away. It's not black and white. It really is all these shades of the rainbow. Sometimes close is better, but other times distance really gives perspective, and it really makes the emotions and the actions in the story more poignant or more powerful. Great. So if we're going to go look at an example here of first person. So this is a first person narrative technique, which is letter writing or letter narration. It really brings the reader very intimately into the story and the characters in that story. So for example, dear mum, I'm wearing the new pale yellow dress we got at that little boutique on Beckham Road. A good thing too. Cousin Charlotte and her boyfriend Richard dragged me to a party just about every night. So what's nice about letter narration, and when I say letter narration, it can be anything, it can be emails or WhatsApps or that kind of more modern form of narration, is that somebody's telling something to another character and another character is going to respond. So immediately we're going to get not just one viewpoint, but a second viewpoint. And if you look at something like Dangerous Liaisons, for example, letters from different characters can also open up the story as well. So this is just one idea of how you can be really close and intimate in your viewpoint technique. And then we're going to go look at one that's just almost on moving across the spectrum, which is a distant viewpoint, sorry, that is a little bit more cool, distant, and even sly. So I'm going to read this for you. It was starting to rain in Leicester Square as the crowd surged against the barriers. Flashes fired from mobile phones, long lenses, and a TV crew as the rear of a long white limo discreetly popped and Ryan Marquez stepped onto the red carpet, his emerald jacket catching the light and shimmering like the wings of an exotic hummingbird. He was, for at least tonight, a bright light in a dull and drizzly world. So in this one, we can see it's third person. The narrator is outside of the story and almost looking down at the story in a cinematic sort of way. This narrator is also being informing the story, like when he compares his jacket to a hummingbird. For example, he's creating something to already tell us that this character is a little bit fragile, exotic, giving us clues as to what the story might be about. And that brings me to another really great proponent of Viewpoint, which is Orson Scott Card. If we go to the next page. And he says where a character is positioned in a scene and their relationship to the events in the story is also very important to consider. If we look at that piece that I read now, is like, why did he position the star, Ryan, in that part of the story? Why did he draw our attention to that specific character? What's happening around this character in this media world of a premiere and movies and fame is also very important because it's setting up what the story is going to be about. So it's already giving us clues as to what the genre will be, what the themes of the story will be, and who the characters are that are going to be important to the story. So when we look at it in that context, we understand that Viewpoint is a very strategic storytelling tool. It's not just about pronouns. It's not just about narrative distance, but it's about our vantage point and the character's vantage point. Where's their physical place in the story, but also more importantly, where's the emotional place in the story? How much access are we going to give our reader to these characters in the story? In third person, you can dive in and out of different characters, so it can be a very balanced viewpoint. So it's very important to understand why you're using a certain viewpoint to tell a certain story about a certain character, or perhaps even a set of characters. So I hope that makes sense. That's a very important thing to get your head around as a novelist, because often you'll be dealing not just with one viewpoint. You may have up to about 4 viewpoints in your average novel length. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. And what I forgot to say earlier was that if you have questions or comments or ideas and you want to post them in the chat so long you can, we'll leave some time at the end for you to ask questions, to discuss things. So yeah, please don't think I'm just blundering on here. I really just want to get the message across, and then we can discuss if we agree with it or not, and how you can use it in the stories you're currently writing. So one of the most common things I get asked is, can you switch viewpoints? And the answer is yes, you can absolutely blend viewpoints. We're allowed to, but don't give your readers whiplash. So what do we mean by that? It's like when you're head hopping, when you're going from one viewpoint to another viewpoint, and eventually the reader's left wondering, but wait a minute, whose head am I in here now? You have to signal the shifts, either with a break in the narrative or a voice change or a viewpoint change. And that's where structure can really help you to keep viewpoint clear in the reader's mind. So, of course, a lot of writers do head hop. It's not a sin, or it's not a crime to do it. Sometimes writers will switch characters' viewpoints purely because they need a little bit of insight from another character and they don't want to slow down the narrative too much. I do find that American authors tend to do it a little bit more than British writers. But it's really, the main thing that I would like to get across here is that you need to be conscious of when you're swapping viewpoints and how often you swapping viewpoints. So think about, if you want to change from one character's viewpoint to another in one scene, how are you going to signal this viewpoint shift in a subtle way? How are you going to reorientate the reader to know that, okay, now I'm in Jeff's viewpoint, and 2 paragraphs later, I'm going to be back in Mary's viewpoint, for example. Those kind of things you're going to have to handle as you're creating the scene. So yeah, there's no rules when it comes to viewpoint. It just, you just need to know why you're doing it, and are you doing it purely to keep the momentum of the story going, to balance out the viewpoint? These kind of things are important to keep in mind. That, because it can actually add a little bit of depth, maybe even a little more drama or a bit of irony to your story. But you really don't want to confuse the reader, is what I'm saying, and more, or even confuse yourself as a writer sometimes. Cool. The next thing that people often are interested in, or yes, you can move to the next slide, thanks, Mia, is the idea of the unreliable narrator. So unreliable narrators are typically used in your viewpoint techniques that are covering first person. That you can't really use them in the third person. But yeah, the reader's left wondering, can they trust this character? Because viewpoint can be subverted. Not all narrators tell the truth, whether they're doing this willingly or unconsciously. And this sense of unreliability can really bring an edge to your story. And what's really cool about this kind of technique, if you can pull it off, is that the reader is involved in the story. And keep in mind, readers love piecing together what's really going on. They like to read between the lines. So what is the narrator omitting? What are they lying about? How are they seeing the world differently that we know might be very different to how normal people see the world? So yes, what is making them so different that we tend to not believe what they're saying all the time? It's a very tricky viewpoint to pull off, but if you can do it, it can really add a lot of depth and drama and a lot of irony, which is wonderful, to your story. Keep in mind that, well, what I believe is that all first-person narrators are, to a degree, unreliable, because as a writer or as a character, they're always going to be bringing some of their own bias, prejudice, or beliefs into the story. So it's also, again, like I said, a degree. It's a matter of degrees of how unreliable you want your narrator to be. Great. So if we go to the next slide. Now we're going to where we are deliberately setting up multiple viewpoints in our story. So if you have more than one narrator or more than one viewpoint, you can explore far more angles in the story. So now we're talking about those stories that move kind of beyond your 80,000 word novel, more towards your 150,000 word novels, where you can have really multiple viewpoints. It's really great for epics, sagas, family dramas, that sort of thing work really well, yeah. And now you're opening up the world. So the world is seen from a lot of different sides. So for example, if you take a family saga like The Poisoned Wood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, every person in that story, in their family, gets a turn to tell their story about the same event. In a thriller, for example, you might also want to see both sides of the chase. So what's happening in the police procedural, what is happening in the criminal world. And what's really nice about this is it does create that tension and dramatic irony. The reader now knows secrets or information that the other characters don't. So yeah, multiple viewpoints work really well, especially if you're writing a longer novel. The only time I would say, if you're creating too many viewpoints in a shorter novel, you might dilute the story a lot, and you might lose a lot of that emotional investment that you want the reader to make into the story. Okay, the next point I want to settle on as well is one I struggled with, and I'm not sure that I fully can explain or even understand the story, the difference myself, is what's the difference between viewpoint and voice? So viewpoint, like we've seen earlier, is a lot of those technical techniques that we can use. Like, are we creating a detached first person? Are we using observer narration? All those things are very stylistic choices to help us tell our story. But the voice of the story is very unique. It's like your fingerprint or the color of your eyes, for example. It's like how you're going to tell a story in a way that is different to any other story that somebody has told. And this doesn't matter if you're writing a category romance or if you're writing something literary or if you're writing a Western. It's like, what are you saying? What are your characters or the narrator in the story saying about the world that they're writing about or living in? Because remember, a strong voice will always draw the reader in and keep them turning the pages. So, yeah, understand what is the attitude of the story, what is the style of the story. How does I always find that the story works better if your narrator or the character sees the world with a bit of a mental squint. Like they don't quite see it the way we might see it, and that makes it super interesting. Um, and what I would say is voice is more tied to your theme. So are you writing about, you know, injustice? Are you writing about uh, gender politics? Those kind of things will also determine how subtle or angry or explicit the voice in the story will be. Because when readers say, like, for example, oh, I like this author, or I like this type of story, or that writer's story, what they're really saying is that they enjoy that writer's view on the world, how they see the world and how they describe that world and the characters in it. So it can be quirky, it can be a little bit sly and sardonic, or it can be so poetically beautiful that you don't really care about the plot at all because the writing is just so rich and beautiful. And that's really what the voice is. So voice, everything in your story, voice, viewpoint, character setting, all blended together. So it's very hard to separate those strands. But you must know what you're saying in your novel and why you want to say it. And it doesn't have to be something new or something mind-blowing. It just has to be something powerful and something authentic and something that readers will be able to relate to. Okay. And then, of course, I just wanted to tie in some pitfalls that we do get caught up, all of us do, is when we jump viewpoints mid-scene without knowing it. It's very dizzying for the writer. Also, what I find, especially with new novelists, is they tend to keep their scenes or their chapters very short before they go into another viewpoint. I don't know if that's because they're not confident enough or if they are bored with the story at that point or still exploring what the story might be. But you have to stay in one viewpoint long enough for the reader to settle into the story, for them to understand who is this character, what is the world that they're living in, and is this a story that I can get invested in from an emotional level? That's very important. And that's why you have to be consistent in how that viewpoint is brought into the story. The biggest sin, of course, is a boring viewpoint. What's going to make your viewpoint different? What's going to make your voice stronger in the story? These are some of the things you need to think about when you write. So yeah, that's a very I just touched on like maybe 8 or 10 things that are important to you as a novelist. Like I said earlier, this is all some stuff that I've taken from my Viewpoint workbook, which is a little bit more thorough and it's more, it goes through all the viewpoints with examples and explains it in depth, maybe a little bit too much depth, but yeah, it'll be a lot richer than this viewpoint that when we only have an hour or so to get through it. Yeah, so we'll stop it there and then we will open the floor if anyone has questions, comments, feedback. All these things are good. And I will let Mia orchestrate who goes where because I still can't see anyone, which is fine.
Yeah, I think if you do have a question, please raise your hand using the button because then we know who has questions because we can't always see everyone. If you want to discuss your viewpoint that you're using with Anthony, anything you're wondering about, any observations you've made, now is your chance. Anyone? Question? Deborah?
Hi, Mia. Hi, Anthony. First of all, I want to say thank you. That was very helpful because where I am in this first novel, or first manuscript that I'm working on, um, I'm coming down the mountain, and but there are a few bumps ahead of me, I'm sure. And so the being reminded, that I don't want to bore my readers. Where I'm at seems a little anticlimactic because this crew living in the 1500s London has just come through a contagion and plague. So that's mighty dramatic right there. And I
Yeah.
realized that became a character unto itself. So I'm learning as I go and I'm making mistakes, but this was a wonderful reminder of what to consider and remember, that things don't necessarily have to get smaller, which I've managed to do somewhat, but that also the horizon needs to be kept a bit more spacious than my thinking allows it as I
That's a
move forward. So thank you so
that's
much.
yeah, that's a brilliant way to put it, to keep the horizon a little bit more spacious.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Deb. Sarah Steele has asked, if you think that perhaps you want to change the viewpoint after the first draft, do
Mm,
you have tips for undertaking that in the second or third draft rewrite?
that's a good question. I think the first thing you'd have to do is, after you've put the story away or the novel away for a while, is ask yourself why that viewpoint that you wrote, that you used in the first draft, wasn't working, and what's motivated this decision to change viewpoints. And then the not so good news is that you're probably going to have to rewrite it from scratch in the new viewpoint. I don't think it's ever going to be as easy as just changing the pronouns and taking out the R's and replacing them with he's and she's and Janes and that sort of thing. But I think the most important thing is to understand why a new viewpoint is going to work better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Sarah, you're welcome to let us know what you think. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's changing viewpoint is a really big change. I think it affects every single line in your stories. It's not something to be undertaken lightly, but if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. But it's a big change.
Yeah. The thing I'll add to that is that some genres will dictate what sort of viewpoints you'll use. So that's why I always say read a lot, especially in the genre that you hope to publish in. So, like I said on this morning's call as well, is that, for example, if you wrote a brilliant romance in the first person and submitted it to Harlequin or Mills and Boons, they wouldn't even look at it because it's in the wrong viewpoint. So yeah, if you are writing genre specific stuff or category stuff, then it's important to understand what viewpoints work. So, I mean, I know that like young adult stories are often now written in the first person because that's what kids that age relate to. So it's good to understand your audience and what they like and what publishers like. So that would also influence your viewpoint choice to a degree. So I hope that helps, Sarah.
Sarah says, yes, it helps. And I'm using closed third person with just a few scenes from my antagonist point of view, but I wonder if there could be more viewpoint characters to open up the world a bit.
And that's definitely worth exploring. Close, like we said earlier as well, in the first class, close third person is very similar to first person. It's a very immersive technique, and it really does bring the reader closer to the character and the world of the story. So that could be a less tricky change to move that into first person. I would say, but yeah,
No, and
it's
yeah,
gonna.
so Sorry, and finish.
No, so it's going to still be a considerable rewrite.
When you open up the story, you do give yourself a few more directions to go in, but you also
Yeah.
make things harder because you make it harder to keep secrets. It's
Mm,
sometimes a bit harder to build tension. But yeah, as long as there's a good reason behind what you're doing, you can literally do anything. I think that's a
yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, no, that's like I said, there's no hard and fast rule here. The only litmus test would be is like, does it work? Do people enjoy it? Are they not confused? That's the payoff, yeah.
Cool. Anyone else with a question? Hop in, tell us something, interesting things. You're all looking very, very serious. I mean, is it like, are we like freaking anyone out here? Is there still hope? No questions. Patty says she enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty.
Cool.
Well, that will be a first year if we finished under time. So
I always think at this point we either confused everyone completely or they're quite brilliant and succinct, and so
yeah.
that's the end of it.
I'm hoping it's the last one, not the first one. But
No,
to be fair, we have done a few classes on Viewpoint, so maybe people do understand it fully now and are using, like we saw in this morning's class, a lot of people are completely on the same page as Viewpoint and are using it brilliantly in the works in progress. So
So this is the fourth class that Anthony has done for us. The other three classes are under the education tab under bonus classes. Then you'll find, because that spectrum Anthony spoke about, he specifically went through everything, like the whole rainbow. And we went through all the what's and the details and examples and everything. So there is still a lot to dive into. It's not something you're going to crack in one go, but I mean, it's definitely a very, very powerful tool to learn to wield. Sarah's also said, I think Viewpoint is interesting because you probably choose it intuitively when you start the first draft, but then it affects so much else. It's like you choose a big foundational thing even without knowing what the effect will be.
yeah, I was funny enough just going to say something very similar. I say, you said, you might struggle with it. Not necessarily. If you have an instinct for for the story and for the characters, it might come very naturally. It should come very naturally. Yeah, so trust your instincts. Trust that little voice or that niggle that says, this Viewpoint isn't working. Maybe I should experiment with something else or try something else.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to what you said, right? You tend to write what you read. So if you read in the viewpoint that you want to write in, it kind of does tend to, it affects so much of your writing, it'll come out like that.
Yeah.
Deb, your question?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to one of my takeaways from hearing. I by no means have mastered this at all. I am just really literally getting my feet wet and then some. But I have found that when I've been working in smallish ways or smaller ways, then I'm able to zoom in and my dialogue or the exchanges, I'm catching myself with greater regularity, not in a punitive way at all, in a creative way, where I
Yeah.
suddenly hear someone who's 5 years old talking as though they were 17, and that's
Yeah.
not gonna work,
Yeah.
So I'm reminded from your providing us with this wonderful opportunity to hear your experience and to learn more about your book about Viewpoint, is that it's a process. And I'm not feeling impatient, but I'm feeling like I'm doing a new kind of a dance because I have about 15 more chapters to go, and then I'm supposed to have it for this round complete to get to write the end. Well, it's making me kind of nervous. And, it's been a delightful process, and but I'm also very aware emotionally where my characters are, and I've made choices for myself that just to play and experiment, and I think I'm a visual learner, and so a lot of my scene work has been where I cinematically drop in.
I'm
And
very
then,
much the same. I have to see the story to write it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everything is curious. That's why we start writing. Hopefully, we become storytellers, is because we're curious about the world around us. Yeah, so that curiosity is part of Viewpoint, is part of writing. Yeah, to be curious all the time. I mean, I would love to say I know everything about Viewpoint, but I don't. And it's something that I'm quite obsessive about. So yeah, it's you should be nervous, but you should be excited at the same time. Then you're in the right emotional state, Deb.
thanks for that.
The feeling, I think the worst part about writing is the more you learn about writing, the more you realize you still have to learn.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's just like
I
you just
saw.
unlock a whole new level.
I see Tracy had something interesting to say, but it cut off.
I'm going to come to Tracy now. So
Okay.
Renee, put her hand up, and then we'll do Tracy's question. So
Okay,
Renee,
cool.
Oh, I'm unmuted. I was having trouble with that. I'm already trying to work on my next novel. So it's a question about murder mysteries.
Yes.
Is there one set point of view that I should use?
I'm trying to think, and Mia can chime in as well. I don't think murder mysteries are that prescriptive as maybe a category romance is. Yeah, normally first person can work quite well in murder mysteries because as the narrator is figuring out who committed the crime or solving the mystery, the reader is maybe one step behind or one step ahead of them. So it does create that nice engagement with the reader. So first person techniques can work really well, but a standard vanilla third person can also work really well. So I don't think there's anything. It depends on how, again, how close do you want the reader to be to the detective or the villain, and how immersed do you want them to be in the plot and the setting and that sort of thing. But from what I've read, there's no really a standard way of doing a murder mystery.
no,
But
I would.
again, read a few more and see if there's a commonality in Viewpoint. Yeah.
I constantly read them, and I'm scared to try and write it, so I'm challenging myself.
Renee, if I were you, go look at the top sellers in that genre for the last 2 to 3 years and see what they were written in. Because like back in the day, it also used to be very much like romance. We would stick crime in with a solid third person and go on from there. But remember, as our young adult audience has been growing up, they were very used to a first person viewpoint. So you'll see a lot of crime coming out in first person lately. But it really depends on which, because crime is also such a big genre. I mean, you can go from a soft little cozy mystery to full on, violence, gore, everything. It's really such, and then there's a jewelry thief in between. So go look at the stories that you like the most, and really don't go back more than 2 or 3 years. Look at the stories that are being published now. So even this year would be so much better, and see which viewpoints they're in.
That's great advice, and I wouldn't have thought of it like that. That is quite an interesting, clever way of doing it. Just to add to that, is like somebody like James Patterson, for example, in his Alex Cross novels. Alex Cross, as the main character, all his scenes or chapters are in the first person, but when it comes to the villain, those are all in third person or some other viewpoint technique. So yeah, it's a very deliberate choice he's made because they cross all the Alex Cross novels. So yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, go look what's out there, what other authors are doing.
Are they ever written in third person omniscient?
Yes, I'm sure they could be.
Thinking about it might be beyond my talent. Thank you very much.
I'm just trying to think now who wrote, what viewpoint did they use for All the Colors of the Dark? I'm going to look that up. Okay, so Renee, we'll come back to your question now if we find out. Tracy said, I attended a class with an author who suggested that you could zoom into a scene in the opening and then go deeper into the character. Would this be an example of blended voices or viewpoint?
Yes. That's a very good example. So I read this book a while ago. It was really well done. So it's at a party, and it starts with a sort of a high level scene of like what the party's about, who's all there. And then almost like a waiter going through the crowd, it stops at each character and you get access to their thoughts and emotion and who hates who and what's the dynamic of the party. So it threads its way all the way through the party, but it starts here and then zooms in. So it's almost like a camera on a dolly, for example. And that is an idea of a blended viewpoint. That's what I'm saying. When you're moving from red to orange in the spectrum, it's like I'm getting close, then I'm pulling back. Yeah, it's a great example of blended viewpoint.
Renee, go check out All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. It is a missing persons mystery, and it was a rip-roaring bestseller, I think last year or this year. And if I remember correctly, that was a very omniscient, very big, very interesting story. It takes place over decades. It was a really cool. Okay.
All the Colors of Dark?
All the Colors
Darkness.
of the Dark.
Okay.
Chris Whitaker, yeah. I think so. I can't find it now, but I think that was a very big viewpoint it was told in. Angelique, your question?
You know the conference that we were in this week that had all the people. One of the things that kind of caught me was the most of the fantasies I've ever read, they're in third person. I still don't quite understand the difference between third person, close, and omniscient. I think the one you can see inside somebody's head, and the other one you can't. But a lot of the people were saying that you need to be able to get like inside of people's thoughts, and I just wonder because most of the fantasies I've written, sorry, not written, I wish. Most of the fantasies I've read, they've never gone into people's heads. You kind of see what they not actions speak louder than words. You see what they thinking by what they're doing. I mean, if somebody's depressed, they're not eating, they're not getting up and washing their hair. You know what I mean? So do you really need to go into somebody's head? And also, what is the standard fantasy version, like epic fantasy written in? Is it closed third or?
I'm not even going to try and answer that because I don't read that at all, or I haven't read one in here. So I wouldn't know. So I'm not going to answer that. But to your other question is, and I think Mia will say it's in the education center as well. I actually did a talk on the 3 different levels of third person. So it might be worth watching that because we did exclusively focus on third person close, third person detached, that kind of thing. So that might help get your arms around that a little bit more. But yeah, and in my mind, you can't have just showing characters unless you're using that as a very deliberate no viewpoint kind of technique, because it will be so alienating to the reader. So in my mind, yes, you must show and don't tell, but all stories are actually a mixture of showing and telling. So yeah, I don't think you can completely get away with not having access to the character's thoughts and emotions. But yeah, that's very much a subjective point of view.
Sorry, I'm just gonna go like if you, Mia, maybe you can jump in here with me. Like if you think Brandon Sanderson, Feist, Gemmell, I mean, they don't go into people's thoughts. They have dialogue and they have what's going on in the scene.
Yeah.
But they never like in Druss, they never go into Druss's thoughts. They never go into, they don't go into the character's thoughts where the character's thinking, I don't know, oh my God, I should have gotten the sword, or I should have gotten and spoken to that person. I mean, what do you mean by getting in people's heads? I mean, is that dialogue? Is it like internal thoughts? Sorry, this has been confusing me this whole week and it's now getting annoying.
Most of fantasy is either the very omniscient or a close.
Yes.
Okay, but it definitely is in the realm of third. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of the newer ones, the romanticides, will be in the first person and stuff, but the stuff that you're talking about is very much solid third person. There's a lot of distance, and it's usually because of the scope of those stories. They are enormous stories, and they take
Yeah.
place over worlds, decades, series,
Mm.
everything. Okay, that's why they're so distant from the reader.
The characters.
Yeah, we're very much in observer mode when we see them, and I think that's what you're referring to. Is we're observing the characters. We're not diving. We're not in their heads. That's, I think, what you're meaning.
So if we look at something like The Magician by Raymond Feist, because we actually had him as a guest speaker once at Writers' Right, so his story is very much an omniscient, godlike narration. So he's telling you what
my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's telling you what the characters are feeling and thinking and that kind of stuff without explicitly saying, John thought this or whatever. He's telling the story from a very big viewpoint. It's like even the opening scene where the storm is broken, and it's cinematic in a whole different way. So he's creating a mood and a feeling that will inform the whole story. So he doesn't necessarily have to say, Angelique thought this as she put the kettle on. I shouldn't have, not done that. All of the characters' emotions and stuff like that will be filtered through this very omniscient viewpoint. And the one thing I do remember about that story is that it has a very dramatic storytelling voice. It's like a fireside story. I'm going to tell you a story about this magician. So those stories won't have close viewpoint like we would find in maybe in close third person. Not at all. No. And that's fine because it fits the genre and what he's trying. I mean, that story is epic on so many levels. Yeah.
It is. It's one of my favorite.
Yeah. So don't get frustrated with it, because not all stories will directly give you access to those characters' thoughts. I mean, unless it's first person, you're never going to have direct access to them all the time. There's always somebody outside of frame moderating, deciding what goes into the story, what comes out of the story. That's you as the author is always the first storyteller. Am I right? You telling the story to someone. So
I was just getting worried because a lot of people this week on this summit were saying that these days you need to get inside people's heads, and I'm like, but there's a lot of people, and this is going to happen over like 4 years, and I'm just like, I don't understand how every story, and I think maybe it's the genre in particular as well. The fact that it's epic fantasy is okay.
Yeah, and that's a danger of absorbing a lot of information, like in a conference or something like that. It does sometimes paralyze you. You have to also trust your story. You have to trust the voice in the story, and you have to trust yourself as the storyteller. And I mean, I read it a long time ago, but like I think it's that Kingdom of Thorn and Ice or whatever. Who wrote that story? It's also told in
J. Morris.
Yeah, it's also got a very epic kind of omniscient viewpoint. So it tends to be the kind of choice for those kind of stories is a far more omniscient viewpoint, far more cinematic and dramatic and very I want to say baroque in a way, but it is very ornate writing, which is cool. And that's what the publisher that's what the editors and agents will be looking for when you submit. That's when that voice that I was speaking about earlier becomes even more important.
Yeah, it's like a very almost like old-fashioned kind of theater kind of voice that you're talking about.
Theatrical. That's a brilliant.
Imagine that the stormy night and people are clustered around and okay, thank you.
Have you read The Name of the Wind? No, is it The Name of the Wind? Patrick, am I right?
Rothfuss. Patrick Rothfuss.
So that, if I remember correctly, he has the narrator sitting in the pub or the tavern or something like that, and he's telling us the story that's happened. So when we're with those they're much closer, they're more intimate. We're there, we have our ale on the table. And then he dives into this big telling story where we're going into these things. So it's still playing with, I think where you are, what I know about your story so far, Angelique, is because it's so big, I don't think you must get too bogged down about theory at this point. Your story's coming out the way that it should be coming out, and it sounds like you have a good understanding of your genre. When we get closer towards the end and you have a stronger handle on what the story is, then you'll start fine-tuning those things and diving into it a bit more. Because what you've told me about your story so far, it's still very open and it's still very big, and you don't really have endings and stuff in place yet. So
No,
I think don't get caught up in theory at this point.
I
Okay.
just this whole week was just so much. I mean, there were some things I've never heard of, and then there were, and I'm like, here I am just writing. I mean, like, you know, I started this year as a very naive kind of person going, oh, I'm going to write a book. So this week was very overwhelming.
Mm.
That it has to, that
Yeah.
everything's so technical, whereas I'm just sitting down and writing how I feel and how I see it in my head, and like everybody's
And that's
going on
fine.
about like distance and just anyway.
Yeah, and that's, remember, also different people will explain things with different terms. Like some people use viewpoint, some people would use point of view. Yeah, there's so many different ways of understanding how you build a story, that it can be absolutely overwhelming. But when you're writing your first draft, I would say yes, just be curious, explore it. Don't worry too much about the technical part of it. That can come later.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Like those summits we did this week, some of them are amazing and they're really fun to do. And then you're going to get to a point where you're like, listen, I need to just step back and not hear anything.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that we always say is a lot of this stuff is second draft stuff. Craft is second draft stuff. It feels weird, but get the story on the page and we'll figure out the craft later.
Yeah.
You're going to sit here and have to go, this has to be this. And you're like, am I doing this? I'm not doing this. You're not getting on the page. You're getting in the way of your own story. So just tell the story. That's all.
Yeah.
Draft is second draft stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. More questions. Where's the chat? Let's see what's happening there. Sarah says, also these days, it's like when the narrator gets into the character's head, they don't say he thought. It's more like the narrator is commenting on the action or other characters in the voice of the character, but it's still in third person. So I don't know, Anthony, what your feel is on this point is it feels like everyone's suddenly very obsessed with interiority.
Yes.
It's like everywhere. It's like interior. And like the first time I was like interiority, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And like, what is this? Oh, look, we're just dealing with another facet of Viewpoint, and it's a DPOV and stuff that we're diving into. But just because we have this like little new snappy name on it, everyone's like obsessed with giving you every single thought in the character's mind. And yes, it's good to learn these things, and it's good to be aware of new things, but it's also a bit of a bandwagon everyone jumps into. We do not every single thought of every single character on the page in that thing. So learn, be open, but always
And
yourself.
I actually have a slightly controversial view on that. So
give us the controversial view. Let's hear.
So a lot of this interiority, that's what they're calling it, has come about through self-publishing. So a lot of these self-publishing books you are in the character's head 24/7. And the problem with that is that there's no exterior markers to tell you where you are in the world. So it can be very confusing. It can be very nebulous. Now, keep in mind that those often those self-published books have never been through an editing process. So that's the negative side of it. But the side that I think people are drawn to, and readers, and especially younger readers, is that it is so immersive that there's completely no barrier between them and the story. So it's almost like it's almost like taking away that complete wall between the author and whatever. And you'll find it a lot in these kind of dark romances and fantasy stories that normally an editor would say, no, you can't write that, which I get, because you're trying to reach a wider audience, but in these stories, it's almost like literary porn. There's no barrier between the actors and the people consuming it. Which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think this is where this interiority has come from, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think it's with any craft thing. It's like the minute it's there, everyone like
Yeah.
jumps this thing and thinks it must be this thing. And you know, if you don't have it, but it
Yeah.
doesn't suit the story, then you kind of get into trouble. That's what I said. Stop ticking boxes. We can like,
Yeah.
this is like Renee, as much as I told you, look at what's being published now. Yes, we have to be aware of the trends because you're going to have to give comp titles and you're going to have to think about, you know, on which shelf this book is going to sell from. But that doesn't mean you change your story to such an extent. The example I always use is the glittery vampire trend. You know, at some point
Yeah.
you'd have a story about, you know, people on the Oklahoma Trail, you know, dying of horrible diseases, and then there's a glittery vampire. You know, that's kind of like what it sounds like with these stories. And the same thing happens with this like romantasy. Everyone's writing romantasy. Now I have to take my romantasy novel and like kind of, you know, find all these, you know, intimate scenes to squeeze in there, which yeah, it's there, but it's not to that extent, you know. So it's stop trying to force your story into what it must be. Tell your story. That's your story. Ours, your story.
Don't follow the trends. Start a whole new one. Yeah, no, I'm being serious. That's when you're going to stand out.
You will, yeah. Okay, are there any more questions? Anything else you're wondering about? Anthony and I can talk about writing for hours. So, I mean, how long do you want to
I need to go soon. But yeah, I'm happy to take another question.
Anything else? Is it all good? Okay, then Anthony, we're going to set you free. Thank you so much.
Yeah, enjoy the writing.
Yes, I'm sure everyone has lots of writing to do now. Thank you for that. It's always fantastic to have you around.
Pleasure.
And then I'm going to start the timer. We'll see you in 60 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mia. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.